My name is Ava Bennett. I'm 32, and I never imagined that the most humiliating moment of my life would occur at my own grandfather's will reading. At the reading, my parents smiled when the lawyer gave Vanessa a $10 million check. They then looked at me and told me, "Go earn your own." But then things changed. From the back of the room, an older man in a gray suit stood up. "There's one more document," he said, lifting a weathered envelope bearing my grandfather's handwriting. My mother's smile faltered. My father's fingers twitched. Lana's eyes narrowed. They had no idea what that letter contained. I did, however, because it was the reason I had returned home. And what happened next changed everything. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask, where are you watching from? Please drop your city or country in the comments so I know how far this story is reaching. If you are new here, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss stories like this one. The envelope, the air in the room seemed to hold its breath the moment Mr. Halverson pulled that old, weathered envelope from his briefcase. He cradled it in his hands as though it were a fragile piece of fine china, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. The paper had yellowed over time, its edges slightly curled, bold. Blocky letters across the front read my grandfather's name, Walter A. Bennett, right beneath it, in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "To be opened only when my whole family's together." Nobody spoke at first. It was as if we had all forgotten how to speak. My mom's smile, which had been so warm and bright just minutes before, slipped away like a sunset fading into dusk. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and when she reached for her water glass, her hand shook enough that the ice softly clinked against the sides. My dad, usually steady as an oak, began tapping his fingers on his knee. A nervous little rhythm gave away more than he'd ever admit. He cleared his throat, tempting to take control of the moment, but the sound simply melted into the heavy silence. Lana, my sister, tilted her head, staring at the envelope as if it had personally insulted her. "What is that supposed to be?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Yet a tremor underneath hinted at something near fear. Mr. Halverson didn't answer right away. He deliberately and slowly set the envelope on the table, then pulled a folded sheet of paper from his briefcase. "This," he said, his voice calm yet firm, "is something your grandfather wrote not long before he left us. It's not legally part of the will, but it represents his personal wishes, his final words to you all." My mom asked, her voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. He looked at her, steady as ever. "It says the letters are to be read only when the whole family is together at the Bennett family ranch in Vermont." The room became so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Then Lana let out a sharp laugh. "You're joking, right?" My dad let out a long, slow breath, rubbing a hand down his face as though he could wipe away the weight of it all. My mom blinked, her eyes wide. "That old ranch? Nobody's lived there in years. You can't honestly expect us to." "Afraid I do," Mr. Halverson cut in, his tone gentle but unyielding. "It was your father's wish, and he was clear about it. There's no legal requirement, but I won't read the letter or share its contents unless his conditions are met." "Then toss it," Lana said, quick as a whip. "It's not binding anyway." "Maybe not," Mr. Halverson replied, his voice steady as a rock. "But it is binding to me, and I know it mattered to him." I looked around the room at their faces and saw more than mere annoyance about a long drive to a cold, dusty ranch in Vermont. 'Twas fear, plain and simple. Fear of what might be inside that envelope. Something they couldn't control. Something none of them saw coming. "The truth settles." My mom leaned forward, staring at the envelope as though it held all the world's secrets, not touching it. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. "He wrote that when he wasn't himself anymore after. He got sick. You can't think. He wrote it 3 weeks before he passed." Mr. Halverson said kindly, clear as a bell, and he had it notarized too. "I've got a recording of him saying, so if you want to hear it." My dad finally spoke up, his voice low, almost gravelly. "What exactly is in there?" Mr. Helverson folded his hands on the table. "I don't know. My job was to ensure it got to you unopened, and to follow his instructions to the letter." For a long moment, nobody moved. The room felt like it was holding its breath again. Then, one by one, their eyes turned to me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look away. I broke the silence first. "I'll go." The words slipped out before I could overthink them, but they felt right, solid, like I'd carved them in stone. My voice didn't waver, and I sat up a little straighter. This wasn't about proving a point. It was something deeper, quieter. Like a door softly closing on all the doubts I'd carried. My mom spun toward me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Ava, come on now. You're not really buying into this, are you?" "I'm not buying into anything," I said, holding her gaze. "I'm doing what Grandpa asked." My dad shifted in his seat, his hands restless. "There's no need to make a big deal out of this, Ava. The will's done. It's settled." Lana crossed her arms, her lips curling just a bit. "You didn't get anything, remember?" "What's a letter going to change?" I looked at her, not with anger, but with a heavy, sad weight in my chest. "You'd be surprised," I said softly. Mr. Halverson cleared his throat, his tone gentle but firm. "I know this feels out of the ordinary, but I would like to schedule the reading for this weekend, Saturday at noon. At the Bennett Ranch. I'll reach out to Mrs. Margaret Bennett to handle the details." At the mention of Grandma's name, something flickered across my mom's face. Guilt, maybe, or something close to it. Nobody had brought up Grandma all day. It's not a single word. It hit me like a quiet thunderclap. I hadn't seen Grandma since Grandpa's funeral. No calls, no cards, not even a message. I had let myself believe she didn't want to talk to me, but what if it wasn't her choice? What if someone had kept us apart? The thought settled in my chest heavy as a river rock. Mr. Halverson went on talking about legal details and arrangements. But my mind was already miles away. I was back on that gravel driveway, hearing the creak of the old porch swing, the soft chime of wind chimes by, the screen door dancing in the summer breeze. I hadn't been to the ranch in over a year, not since that spring before Grandpa passed. I could still see the wide stretching fields, the magnolia trees blooming too early, and the little greenhouse behind the barn where Grandpa let me set up my first science experiment when I was just a kid. Plastic tubs, scribbled notebook pages, and bee diagrams in colored pencil. A perfect disaster, he'd called it, grinning. I'd never been prouder, but then the family decided science was just a phase. That my quiet nature was a weakness. That love was something you earned by being polished, charming, easy to understand. I'd never been any of those things. That's why the ranch was my haven. There with Grandpa, I could just be me, and now we were all going back to the one place they thought they'd left behind, the one place they couldn't bend to their will. The confrontation when Mr. Halverson finished. He handed me a card with his number and gave me a nod that felt kind, like he understood more than he let on. "I'll talk to your grandmother this afternoon," he said. I nodded, unable to find words. My parents stood, grabbing their coats and bags without a sound. Lana rolled her eyes, slinging her fancy purse over her shoulder. "This is absurd," she muttered under her breath. Nobody answered her. They shuffled out of the room, but I stayed a moment longer, rooted to my chair. When the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Then I grabbed my bag and stood. Before I walked out, Mr. Halverson spoke again. "Miss Bennett." I turned, and there he was, holding that unopened envelope. "Whatever is in here," he said softly, "he wanted you to hear it. You especially." My throat tightened, but I managed a small nod. "I will." That night, I sat in my car outside my apartment, the engine off, the world buzzing around me. Neon lights glowed in the windows. Folks hurried by with their coffees and earbuds, caught up in the city's hum. But my heart wasn't there anymore. It was already on a dusty road in Vermont, caught somewhere between memories and truths I hadn't yet uncovered, and I wasn't coming back until I found them. The ranch, the gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the ranch. The sound was sharp and familiar, like the opening notes of a song I used to know by heart. It had been over a year since I'd been here. Everything looked the same, but not quite right. Not warm, not welcoming, just there, like an old tune that catches in your throat and leaves you aching. The white paint on the porch had peeled more than I remembered, flaking off like forgotten promises. The wind chimes still hung by the door, but their song was faint, brittle, like they'd lost their voice. The magnolia trees along the fence still leaned too far east, chasing something they'd never reach. And those wooden steps, they creaked, just like they did when Grandpa would slip out for a late-night glass of lemonade, spinning stories that made the stars seem closer. I stood in front of the door for what felt like forever. I wasn't scared. Not exactly, but there was something heavy in my chest. Cue, sadness, maybe a spark of anger, all knotted together in a silence that had gone on too long. I knocked once, half expecting nothing. Then the door creaked open, and there she was. Grandma Margaret Bennett. Her gray hair was pulled back in that same tidy bun, her eyes sharp as ever. Her posture was like she was carved from stone and stubborn pride. No smile, no open arms, just a look that pinned me in place and a voice that cut clean through. So you finally decided to show up. I opened my mouth, but words failed me. She folded her arms. Took you long enough. I took a shaky step forward. Grandma, She raised a hand, stopping me cold. They told me you were too busy. Said you had a new life. Didn't want to be bothered. Her voice cracked just for a second, but she pulled it back quick, like she'd trained herself to hide the hurt. I blinked, stunned. That's not true. I called. I came by in March. Lana said no one was home. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as a hawk's. We were here. Always were. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. It carried years of pain, unspoken and raw. Then she turned and walked back into the house. I stood there, frozen before following her inside. The air felt thick, like the walls had been holding their breath since the day Grandpa left us. Uncovering the truth, she came back with something in her hands, a small, worn leather notepad. This, she said, holding it out, is the number he kept calling. I looked down and saw Grandpa's handwriting, blocky and neat, with that slight slant he always used for phone numbers. But the number wasn't mine, not even close. Grandma, I said slowly, this isn't my number. I've had the same one since college. She stared at the notepad, her brow creasing, her hand trembling just a bit. They told us you changed it, said you didn't want to be found, that you were ashamed of us. No, I whispered, stepping back, my legs unsteady. They lied. They cut me off on purpose. She sank into the old floral armchair by the fireplace, the one where she used to sit and watch me play. They told me you didn't want to come to the funeral, that you didn't care. I showed up, I said, my voice cracking like thin ice. They told me it was at noon. I got to the church and it was empty. She looked up, slow and deliberate. The funeral was at 9 o'clock. For a moment we just sat there, the truth settling between us like dust. Something inside me broke wide open. I would never have missed it, I whispered. Never. She reached for my hand, her grip strong despite her small frame. Her eyes were tired but fierce. We know the truth now, she said softly. That's what matters. We know. The revelation we sat in that room, the same one where I used to stack block towers at her feet. Where Grandpa would read his science journals and answer my endless questions without a hint of impatience. A room where voices were only raised for a good story or a close football game. Now, the silence wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy, with all the things we hadn't said for too long. Then, Grandma stood, her back straighter than I thought possible. Her eyes lit with a fire I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "I'm calling them," she said. "Who?" She didn't answer. She marched to the kitchen, yanked the old rotary phone off the wall, the one Grandpa refused to replace even when the line crackled and started dialing. Each slow turn of the dial felt like a clock ticking down to something big. I stood behind her as she spoke, her voice cool and steady as steel. "Betty, Jacob, Lana, I need you all here now." A pause. "No, it can't wait. Be here in an hour." She hung up without a goodbye. Then she turned to me. "The lawyer's on his way, too." "Grandpa's lawyer?" I asked, my eyes wide. She nodded. "Your grandfather left instructions, a reading, but only when everyone's here. So that's what we're doing." I didn't say a word. I just nodded, because finally someone was ready to face the truth. And I wasn't about to stand in the way. The storm gathers for that next hour. The house was still, wrapped in a quiet that felt almost sacred. Grandma moved through the kitchen with the same steady grace I remembered from when I was a kid. She boiled water, sliced lemons with care, and pulled out 2 chipped teacups from the cabinet, setting them gently on the table. Every motion was deliberate, like she was anchoring herself in the familiar rhythm of routine. I sat there, tracing the worn grain of the kitchen table with my fingers. The same table where Grandpa used to sit every morning, sipping his black coffee, flipping through the science journals I'd send him from Seattle. It was where I first told him I wanted to study biology. And instead of asking what I'd do with it, he asked what I hoped to learn. That table held a lifetime of dreams. The house still carried the faint scent of lemon oil and cinnamon. And the fridge hummed its soft, steady tune. But there was a tension in the air, like a storm gathering just outside the windows, waiting to break. Then we heard it. Car doors slamming, footsteps crunching on the gravel, voices drawing closer, low and restless. My mom's voice came first, bright and polished, like she was stepping onto a stage. "Oh my, it smells just like it always did. Takes me right back." My dad's voice followed, calm but clipped. "I thought we'd settled all this already." Then Lana, sharp and impatient. "Really? This couldn't wait until the estate sorted." I stayed in my seat. Didn't want to be the first thing they saw. I wanted them to feel the quiet of this house, to sit with its weight, to remember what this place meant before they started treating it like a chore. Grandma met them at the door, her voice colder than a winter wind. "Sit down. Mr. Halverson will be here soon. He's reading Walter's final wishes." They shuffled into the living room, their politeness thin as a sheet of ice. I heard the old couch creak as someone sat, the jingle of Lana's bracelets as she crossed her arms, and my mom's soft voice laced with irritation. Then the front door creaked again, slower this time, followed by heavier footsteps. "Margaret," a voice called out, warm but formal. "Good to see you again." Grandma's tone softened, just a touch. "Thank you for coming." That was my signal. I stood, smoothed my blouse, and stepped into the hallway. As I walked into the living room, 3 heads turned toward me at once. My mom's smile froze, caught halfway between charm and shock. My dad's jaw tightened, his fingers tugging at his collar like he always did when he was uneasy. Lana's face went pale, her lips parting but no words coming out, like someone had snatched the script from her hands mid-scene. I moved slowly, deliberately, my back straight. If they thought I'd shrink under their stares, they were in for a surprise. Grandma pointed to the empty armchair across from them, and I sat. Folding my hands in my lap, Mr. Halverson gave me a small professional nod, then opened his briefcase and pulled out that envelope. It looked even older now, like it had soaked up every unspoken word, every betrayal, every silent wound between us. He cleared his throat and began. "The last will and testament. This is the last will and testament of Walter A. Bennett, recorded and sealed as he requested. Beyond the legal documents already filed, he left a personal letter and directive to be read aloud here, with all of you present." Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed too loud. He turned to the first page. To my wife, Margaret Bennett. I leave our family ranch, the house, and enough funds for her comfort and care. She knows how to find the rest. Grandma gave a tiny nod. Quiet but sure, like she and Grandpa had an understanding that needed no words. Then he turned the page. To my granddaughter, Ava Bennett. The room seemed to tighten, the air growing thick. I felt it, a shift, like the ground moving beneath us. He went on, I leave the Bennett Research Annex at 317 Laurel Creek Road, including all laboratory equipment, research funding, intellectual property, and active patents under Bennett Innovation. A sharp breath cut through the room. Not mine. Lana's head whipped toward our parents, her eyes blazing. I kept my hands still, folded in my lap, and finally, Mr. Halverson continued, the rest of my estate. Financial holdings, stocks, and retirement accounts shall be divided equally between my two granddaughters, Ava and Lana Bennett. The words were clear, simple, like a bell ringing in the quiet. But the storm broke right after Lana shot to her feet, her chair scraping the floorboards with a screech. What? She was shaking, her voice raw. He gave her the annex. The whole facility. She pointed at our parents, her voice climbing. You told me it'd all be mine. That if I kept visiting, smiled, played nice, followed the plan. My dad shifted, his face unreadable, saying nothing. My mom stared at her hands like the world she'd built had just crumbled beneath her. Lana turned to me, her eyes wild. This is insane. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Mr. Halverson raised a hand, gentle but firm. There's more. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folded letter. Its edges were yellowed and creased. He also wrote a personal letter to Ava. He said, to be read aloud here with all of you. I heard Lana's bitter laugh, but it stood alone. Grandma reached into the drawer beside her and handed him the letter. He wrote it the week before he passed, she said softly. Made me promise. Mr. Halverson unfolded it carefully, like it was something sacred. The air in the room shifted again, heavy with anticipation. Then he started to read, and what came next would rip open wounds none of us were ready to face. A letter from Grandpa Mr. Halverson unfolded the letter with care, his hands smoothing out the creases like he was handling something sacred. The room fell silent, so quiet you could hear the wind whispering through the magnolia trees outside, brushing the windows like an old, half-forgotten memory dot. Then he began, to my dearest Ava. The words landed soft and warm, like a breeze, slipping through a door I'd kept locked for years. If this letter is being read, I'm no longer with you. But my faith in you, that's as strong as ever. My throat tightened, but I kept my eyes on him, wanting them to hear every single word. You were always the quiet one, the one who watched, who wondered why when others didn't even notice. I caught Lana shifting in her seat from the corner of my eye. My mom's hands twisted in her lap. My dad stared at the floor, his face blank. You built your own truth in a family that never learned to value it, the letter went on. And still, you never stopped being kind, never stopped trying. I didn't blink, didn't let myself waver. I saw how your joy faded when your mother brushed off your excitement, how your father changed the subject every time you shared something you were proud of. I saw you make yourself smaller so they wouldn't feel uneasy around your light. My mom let out a soft gasp, barely audible. I kept my eyes on Mr. Halverson. You were never a mistake, Ava. You were my legacy, the part of me I was proudest of. Not for what you accomplished, but for who you are. You were the only one who asked what kindness meant to soil, who cared, what bees remember. It's the only one who stayed up late with me, sorting seed samples, wondering if roots could recognize voices. Tears stung my eyes, and I let them fall unashamed. I could see it all again. Those late nights, the little green notebook with sticky pages, my childish sketches of plant roots chatting like old pals. I remember when you won your first science fair. The letter continued, and you asked me to hide the trophy so it wouldn't tease you. You said maybe if I don't show it, they'll stop looking at me like I'm someone else's child. My breath caught. A sharp exhale came from across the room. I couldn't tell if it was my dad or Lana, but I knew what it carried. Regret. You deserved celebration, Ava, not invisibility. I can't undo what was taken from you, but I can give you something that's yours alone. Mr. Halverson's voice stayed steady, but every word added weight to the room. I've built that research annex for you. Quietly, carefully, a place away. From the noise where you don't need permission to ask questions, where no one will call you too much, too strange, too intense. Something warm bloomed inside me. A quiet kind of healing. I leave it to you, not as a reward, but as a beginning. It's a place to build without apology, to wonder without shrinking, to grow without fear. Mr. Halverson paused, looking up. The silence wasn't empty, it was brimming. With memory, with truth, with things we could no longer ignore. I cleared my throat, my voice soft but steady. I remember that science fair. Mom didn't come. She was at Lana's dress rehearsal. Lana flinched just slightly. I came home with that trophy, holding it like it was something to be ashamed of. My dad's voice broke the quiet, thin and strained. Ava, this isn't the time. No, I said, calm but firm. It's the only time. This family spent years asking why I couldn't be more like her. I turned to Lana and you. Every time I was proud of something, you made it feel like a threat. She scoffed, but her voice wobbled. Oh, please. You always played the victim. I worked for what I got. I nodded slowly. Do you mean you smiled when they told you to? You played the part. Then I looked at my mom. You told Grandma I didn't want to see her. You gave Grandpa a fake number. You made sure his messages never reached me. That's not distance. That's erasure. My mom stood, her voice sharp and rising. Enough, Ava. You're twisting everything. Then Grandma rose, her voice cutting through like a blade. This family, she said, has been living a lie. My mom turned to her. Mother, don't. But Grandma wasn't stopping. I watched you all turn your backs on her. I believed you when you said she didn't care. I should have known better. She looked at me, her eyes softening. I'm sorry. Those words landed heavy like an anchor finding the ocean floor. Then she turned back to them. All of you out. My dad opened his mouth to argue, but she pointed to the door. I said, out. You're not welcome here. Not anymore. Core. A moment, nobody moved. Then Lana grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking like a fading echo. My parents followed, quiet, stunned, their steps heavy with defeat. For the first time in my life, they left with nothing. The door didn't slam when they left. It just clicked shut, soft and final, like the last note of a song fading into silence. I stood in the middle of the living room, hands at my sides, breathing in the quiet. The air felt different now, lighter, like a weight had lifted. Not sharp, not heavy, just free. Grandma walked past me, slow and steady, and eased herself onto the couch. Her hands, shaky earlier, now rested calm and still in her lap. I sank down beside her, curling my legs under me like I used to when I was little, waiting for one of her stories. They'll come back, I said softly. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the front door. Maybe, but this time we don't have to open the door. Her words settled deep, like roots finding solid ground. For so long, I'd lived my life trying to prove I was enough, successful enough, quiet enough, useful enough to earn their love. But sitting there in the room Grandpa built with his own hands, in the house where he'd nurtured a 10-year-old girl with dirt on her cheeks and a notebook bursting with dreams, I saw it clear as day. I'd been chasing love from people who didn't have it to give. And Grandpa, he'd seen it long before I ever did. I stood and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the magnolia branches swayed gently in the wind, carrying the same breeze that used to bring the scent of his aftershave, the soft hum of his voice as he tinkered in the shed. In that moment, I felt him with me. Not in some far-off mystical way, but in the bones of this house, in Grandma's quiet strength, in the letter that gave me permission to start over. I turned to her. "I think I need to see it," I said. She looked up, her eyes questioning. "The annex," I said. "What he built. I want to see it for myself." A small smile touched her lips, soft as a memory. He'd like that, and so would I. 4. The first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I didn't feel invisible. That, more than money, more than any legacy, was the truest gift this family had ever given me. The next chapter was already unfolding, and this time it was mine too, right? The annex unveiled, we drove in silence. It's the road from the ranch to the annex, winding through fields of golden grass and shadowed pines, blurred the line between memory and today. Grandma sat beside me, hands folded neatly in her lap, her presence as steady as the old oak beams of the house we just left. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. In that quiet, she was my anchor, something solid when everything else felt like it was slipping. The GPS blinked as we turned off the pavement onto a dusty gravel path. A weathered wooden sign, half hidden by weeds, leaned crooked by the gate. Bennett Research Annex. Private. Property. I eased the car to a stop as the building came into view. It looked like a barn-wide rectangular, with a tin roof and faded red paint. Its big wooden doors were more suited for horses than a laboratory. I stepped out. The wind greeted me like an old friend, carrying the scent of warm soil, pine, needles, and a faint metallic tang like the ghost of honest, hard-working days. Grandma walked ahead, her steps slow but sure. She pulled a small brass key from her coat pocket and slid it into the side door's lock. It clicked open with a soft groan. "Your grandfather always said the front doors were just for show," she said, a hint of a smile in her voice. "Only those who knew what mattered would come in through the side." I followed her inside and stopped short, my breath catching. The space was alive with light. A whole wall of glass let the morning sun spill across stainless steel tables, shelves lined with microscopes, beakers, laptops, and notebooks. A 3D printer sat unopened in its box, waiting for its moment. Everywhere I looked, there was promise. Life not yet lived. A row of lab coats hung by the entrance, each tagged. The first read, "A Bennett." The others bore names I didn't know yet. In the center of the room stood a long wooden workbench. And there, my heart stuttered, was my old notebook. It's a green leather one, its corner torn, pages smudged with my childhood drawings of bees. I thought I'd lost it in college. That notebook where I'd scribbled honeybee flight patterns, squinting through Grandpa's magnifying glass in the backyard. I walked to it slowly, my hands shaking. Grandma stayed a step behind, watching quietly. I touched the cover, smaller. Now lighter, but somehow heavier, like it held years of waiting. "He carried it with him," she said softly. Every conference, every meeting said it reminded him why science mattered. I opened it. Taped to the first page was a photo of me at 10, kneeling in the dirt, holding a jar of bees with a grin so big it lit up the world. Next to it, in Grandpa's careful handwriting, she asks the questions others are too afraid to hear. I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest. The silence between us was warm, safe, like a long overdue embrace. The stolen connections. Then Grandma stepped to a drawer under the workbench. "I think it's time you saw this," she said, her voice steady. She pulled out a wooden box, long and shallow, with a brass latch. Inside were letters, dozens of them, stacked neatly. My name written on every envelope in Grandpa's unmistakable hand. My stomach dropped. These are for me." I asked. She nodded. "He wrote you every week after he got sick. Told me not to push, to give you space. He thought you were busy, maybe protecting your career." I picked up the top envelope, its edges yellowed but unopened. "I never got any of these." "I know," she said, her voice soft as a sigh. "I didn't either." Your mother said you wanted no contact, that you needed distance. My fingers trembled as I opened the first letter. 2 pages filled with his careful script. He asked about. My research told me about the greenhouse tomatoes that wouldn't sprout. Wondered if I still remembered how to make his favorite chamomile tea. At the bottom, a simple close. We miss you. Come home when you can. No pressure, just love. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the ache spread. I would have come, I whispered. If I'd known, I would have been here. I know. You would, Grandma said, her voice steady but warm. Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. Not yet. Not until I understood just how far the lies had reached. I sat on the edge of the workbench, the stack of unopened letters resting heavy. In my lap, each one felt like a heartbeat I'd been cheated out of. Moments stolen before I even knew they existed. I ran my fingers over the wooden box, half hoping, maybe naively, that this was the worst of it. But deep down, I knew the worst liked to bide its time. The Betrayal uncovered Grandma stood by a tall, old metal filing cabinet in the corner, the kind that groaned when you tugged its drawers. Your grandfather kept everything, she said softly. Notes, receipts, documents. He always said paper doesn't lie the way people do. She opened the bottom drawer and beckoned me over. Inside were folders, dozens of them, neatly labeled. By year, she handed me one marked Annex Development. 5 years. It was thick, heavy with plans, permits, invoices, and Grandpa's handwritten notes. Every detail carefully tracked. I flipped through architects' sketches, equipment budgets, and letters to local contractors, all precise, so like him. Then I reached the back. Tucked inside was a slim blue folder labeled Operating Account, Grant Cycle 3, Bank Statements. I skimmed them at first, just curious. Then I stopped cold. 3 large withdrawals, each just under $50,000. Pulled from the Bennett Research Annex account, not to a lab vendor or equipment supplier. They'd been wired to a company called GWL Holdings LLC. I froze. GWL. Gregory William Lawrence, my father's name. I stared at the paper, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I pulled the next month's statement. Another withdrawal. Same amount. Same recipient. I turned to Grandma. Did you know about this? She took the folder, adjusted her glasses, and read. Her lips pressed into a thin line. After a long pause, she said, He confronted your father about it? When? 6 months before he passed, she said. She closed the folder gently. They fought badly. Your grandfather threatened to report him to the university's ethics board. Said if he didn't return the money, he'd go public. Heart pounded. Why didn't he? Eyes met mine. Tired but honest. Because he didn't want you caught in the crossfire. I swallowed hard, the truth bitter in my throat. So he stayed quiet. She nodded. And made sure the rest of the funding couldn't be touched without a full board signature. He changed everything, protected what he could. I turned back to the cabinet, pulling another folder, then another. The story unfolded page by page. My father had used the annex as a front, submitting fake grant extensions, forging expense reports, pocketing the difference through shell accounts. It was all there, clear as day. I felt sick, not just at what he'd done, but at how well it had worked. They'd all smiled at the funeral, at the will reading, like nothing was wrong. They'd looked at me like I was the ungrateful one, when all along I'd been cut off, lied to. I leaned against the cabinet, gripping its edges to steady myself. I should have seen it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandma shook her head. No, sweetheart, we're never supposed to see it. That's the difference. She rested a hand on my shoulder, warm and firm. You've always walked through this world believing people were honest, and they took advantage of that. I glanced at the folder in her hands. Do you think he knew how much it would hurt? I think he hoped, she said softly, that one day you'd be strong enough to face the truth and not let it break you. Echoes of the past. I closed my eyes. I wasn't broken, but I wasn't the same either. I sank back onto the workbench, the open folder staring up at me, its numbers blurring into a haze. At once, I was 12 again, barefoot in the hallway of our old house, clutching a manila envelope to my chest. My name was scrawled across it in thick marker. Ava Bennett, regional finalist. I'd poured weeks into that project, building a model of plant memory from recycled bits, borrowed lab slides, and a voice recorder hidden in a shoebox to test how seedlings responded to sound. I could still see Grandpa's face lit up with pride when I showed him the results. He'd snapped photos, printed them, and pinned them to the corkboard above his desk, right where he could see them every day. That day I'd come home early from school, the envelope in my hands, my heart so full it could have burst. But the second I pushed open the door, I heard my mom's voice, sharp and quick, cutting through the air. "She's not the one we should be investing in, Greg. Lana's got poise, presence. That's the kind of kid who will land a scholarship. That matters." My dad's voice came next, calm and practical, like he was balancing a checkbook. "Ava's creative, sure, but she's not polished. And this science thing, what's it really going to lead to?" I didn't walk into the kitchen. I just stood there, frozen in the hallway, my fingers tightening until the envelope's edges crumpled. A few days later, the school announced a fully funded trip to the National Youth Science Conference, one student per district. I had the recommendation letter, the scores, the project, everything. But Lana had a recital that same weekend, a solo at the city gala. When the school called to confirm my spot, my parents told them I had prior family obligations. I didn't even know about the call until months later. They never asked me, never gave me a choice. Instead, they took us shopping for Lana's gown, and I sat in the front row, clapping politely as she glowed under golden lights. That was the first time I felt it. The slow, quiet slide from being seen to fading away. Like I was turning invisible right in front of them. The path forward back in the annex. I ran my hand along the workbench's edge, feeling the smooth grain under my fingertips, pulling myself back to the present. So many moments like that, one from childhood, had piled up over the years, each one folding into the next. College applications my parents forgot to mail. Letters of recommendation they misplaced. Family photos where I stood at the edge, half-cropped. Out always by accident, or so they said. I glanced at Grandma. She was flipping through one of the grant files, her lips pressed tight, a quiet fury burning in her eyes. "I never knew," I said softly. She looked up, her gaze steady but heavy. "I wish I'd asked more questions," she said. "They always told me you were busy, independent. Said you didn't like calls, that you were too focused to be bothered." Let out a hollow laugh, the kind that stings more than it soothes. I would have given anything for a phone call, for someone to say they were proud. Grandma crossed the room and sat beside me on the workbench. "I'm proud of you," she said. The words were simple, but they hit like an anchor, steadying me after years of drifting. I nodded, swallowing the ache in my throat. "I just don't understand how they could lie so easily." "Because they were more afraid of you succeeding without them," she said, her voice low and sure, "than they were of you failing." The silence settled between us again, warm but heavy, like a quilt stitched with truth. I reached for another drawer and pulled it open. More files neatly organized, but one caught my eye. A folder labeled Legacy Partners. Inside was an unsigned contract, a proposal, and a letter addressed not to me, but to a foundation. It was Grandpa's plan to turn the annex into a public science initiative for kids from rural schools. Kids like I'd been quiet, overlooked, bursting with wonder, but starved for opportunity. He'd even given it a name, the Quiet Geniuses Program. And next to the title in his bold, steady hand, "For Ava and for the ones like her, they are the future." I closed the folder gently, my fingers lingering on the cover. This wasn't just about clawing back a past they'd stolen. It was about building something new, something no one could take away again. The new legacy the sun hung low in the sky as we locked up the annex, its light streaming through the glass wall, painting the floor in warm gold. Dust motes danced in the beams like the past finally loosening its grip. I stood outside watching. The breeze rippled through the field beyond the fence, the grass swaying like it was whispering secrets. Behind me, Grandma shut the door with a soft click. "He built it for you," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "Even when they didn't believe in you, he never stopped." I nodded, the truth settling deep. I feel like I've spent years trying to prove I wasn't the mistake they made me out to be. She met my eyes, her gaze clear and steady. "You were never the mistake, Ava. You were the mirror they couldn't face." Her words sank in, heavy and true. I reached into my bag, pulled out the old notebook with the bees on the cover, and opened it to a blank page. With a pen from Grandpa's drawer, I started writing the Quiet Geniuses Project. Phase 1, reopen the annex. Partner with rural schools. Build scholarship outreach. Honor his vision. Rewrite mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like someone left on the sidelines of something sacred. I felt like the architect of something new. As we walked back to the car, Grandma paused. "You know, they won't like this," she said softly. "Well, fight it, maybe try to stop it." I gave her a faint smile. "They can try, 'cause this time I wasn't chasing their approval. I was doing it for the girl who used to kneel in the backyard, watching bees through a borrowed magnifying glass, believing science could change the world. I was doing it for Grandpa, and for every quiet, brilliant soul who'd been told they didn't belong at the table. I'd build a new one. Confrontation and clarity 2 days after the podcast aired. A formal notice landed in my inbox. The university was calling me and my father to an internal review hearing. No public, no press, no recordings, just the truth laid bare. I walked into the panel room in a dark navy suit, calm and ready. Clutching a folder with the annex blueprints, funding statements, and Grandpa's letter from 6 months before he died warning the board about discrepancies. My father was already there, seated, pale as a ghost, a hollow version of the man who once commanded department meetings. He didn't meet my eyes. The panel chair nodded. "Miss Bennett, please proceed." I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. "These are the original documents for the Bennett Research Annex, written and notarized by Dr. Robert Bennett. Show discrepancies between grant disbursements and personal withdrawals to a private LLC registered under my father's name." The room stayed silent, but the weight of those words rippled like a stone dropped in still water. My father cleared his throat. I was unaware of the transfers, likely a mistake by an assistant or accountant. I had no intention. I cut him off, my voice steady, of digital signatures and email correspondence requesting those exact amounts. Signed Gregory W. Lawrence, with timestamps. He froze. A board member, a woman in her 60s, leaned forward. I was a postdoc under Dr. Bennett. He was exacting, honest, a man of fierce ethics. "This breaks my heart." That moment broke something in him, not me. They excused me after my presentation, but the looks on their faces told me his fate was already unraveling behind those closed doors. Outside, Grandma waited on a bench under a maple tree. "Did you do what you needed to do?" she asked. I nodded. Then a message pinged on my phone. "Family meeting tonight, our house. No exceptions." I almost laughed, but I went. We sat around the dining table that once held Christmas turkeys and birthday cakes. My mother sat rigid at one end, hands clasped tight. My father, still in his suit from the hearing, sat across from her. Vanessa's arms were crossed, her eyes blazing. "You embarrassed us," she snapped. I told the truth. I said simply. Dad leaned in, his voice low and sharp. "If you don't retract those claims, we'll sue you for defamation and cut you off for good." I held his gaze. "You all ready?" "Cut me off. You just didn't have the guts to say it out loud." Mom spoke up, her voice trembling. You've ruined your father's career. Is that what your grandfather would have wanted? I looked at the woman who once taught me to braid my hair. He would have wanted you to choose integrity over loyalty. You chose wrong. The silence that followed roared louder than any argument. I stood. I'm not here to beg, explain, or cry. I came to tell you I'm done. Vanessa scoffed. What's that supposed to mean? It means you won't hear from me again? No calls, no visits. I've filed legal documents, removing myself from any future estate considerations. I'm not part of this family anymore, not in name, not in heart. They didn't believe me until I slid the notarized envelope across the table and walked out. Success and acknowledgement 2 weeks later. I stood on a small stage in the town library, humble and quiet, just the way Grandpa would have liked. I was launching the Quiet Geniuses Project. Today, I said, we open a space for brilliant minds often overlooked. Those in rural communities from low-income homes where talent burns quietly. My grandfather believed in those minds and now will invest in them. The crowd rose, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. A woman in a lab coat whispered, "Thank you. We needed this." I glanced to the back and saw an older man in a suit by the door. He nodded once. Later, I learned he was from the Eisenald Foundation, a group that funds ethical science projects worldwide. 3 days after, they pledged a $2 million grant to the Quiet Geniuses Project. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Not for shouting the loudest, but for speaking the truth and standing firm. And this was just the beginning. I sat on the edge of the workbench, the stack of unopened letters heavy in my lap. Each one a missed moment, stolen before I knew it was. Gone. My fingers traced the wooden box, hoping, maybe naively, that this was the end of the pain. But pain always knows how to linger. Grandma stood by an old metal filing cabinet in the corner, its drawers groaning with age. Your grandfather believed in stories, she said softly. But more than that, he believed in keeping the truth, safe until the time was right. She handed me a small brass key, a tag dangling from it. Room 2, a Oak Ridge library. I blinked. That place has been closed for years. Exactly, she said, and walked away. The Quiet Geniuses Project had taken off faster than I dreamed. In just months, we'd secured the $2 million from the Eisenald Foundation and another $800,000 from private donors. Many of them Grandpa's former students, strangers whose lives he'd touched. They wrote to me, sharing stories of how he'd changed them. And now they wanted to give back. We had turned the Old Town Library into a hub of innovation. Rooms filled with secondhand laptops, 3D printers, whiteboards, and shelves of donated textbooks. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. Every afternoon, kids showed up with notebooks, curiosity, something I hadn't seen in them before, hope, the ripple effect one quiet morning. I walked into the center and found a glossy magazine on the front desk, my face on the cover. The headline read, "The Legacy of Genius, Ava Bennett and the Future of Rural Innovation." It was a small education journal, but its reach was bigger than I'd expected. By lunch, my phone was buzzing. Messages of congratulations and a few. That stung. One stood out from my mother. "We saw the article. Come home for dinner. We need to talk." I stared at it for a long time, my gut telling me to stay away, but I went. The table was set like a stage. Roasted chicken, wine glasses, linen napkins, folded just so. Too perfect. Mom's smile was tight. Dad looked thinner, worn down. Vanessa sat in a designer dress, her posture rigid like she was ready to run. "We're proud of you," Mom said. Pouring wine into my glass, "Your grandfather would be thrilled." Her words rang hollow, rehearsed. Vanessa stayed silent, her eyes sharp. Dad cleared his throat. "We were thinking, your program's doing so well, it might be time to expand. Bring in experienced voices, people with academic and administrative know-how." I stared at him. You want to be part of the project?" He nodded. "It's been tough since the board dismissed me. Hard to find work. Your sister could help. Coordinate, too." There it was. It's not reconciliation, but a grab for my work. My name? No. I said, calm but firm. This project isn't a family inheritance. It's a mission built from the ashes you left behind. The air turned cold. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice cutting. "You wouldn't have this without our name. Without the education our parents paid for. You owe them." "I owe Grandpa," I said, "and the people who believed in something bigger than legacy or control." I left before dessert. The next morning, a headline hit the local news site. "Quiet Genius or Calculated Avarice. Ava Bennett's Rise, Questioned by Family." It quoted Vanessa, unnamed but unmistakable, accusing me of exploiting Grandpa's death for personal gain, using his memory to boost my career. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I didn't respond, but the donors noticed. The press called, and my team grew uneasy. That night, alone in the office, I wondered if I'd gone too far, if my need to prove myself was turning into a vendetta, if I was becoming like them. Then a knock came at the door. Wes Marcus, one of our first students. 15, quiet, brilliant. He held out a binder with his prototype, a solar-powered water filter for the county's aging plumbing systems. "I just wanted to show you," he said. "Without this place, I wouldn't be building anything." That moment pulled me back from the edge. I thanked him, and I knew I wasn't lost. Standing firm, the next hit came like a freight train. A legal notice landed in our foundation's inbox. An anonymous group questioning our nonprofit status, hinting at a conflict of interest. I didn't need to dig far to know who was behind it. My father's old colleague, now a lawyer, had his name on the paperwork. It was a calculated move meant to rattle us. My team was in chaos. Funds frozen, programs on hold, students left confused. I had two paths: hide or speak. 2 weeks later, I stood on a TEDx stage in Chicago. The video opened with silence, the kind that pulls you in. Then I stepped forward. "My name is Ava Bennett. I'm not a genius. I'm not a martyr. I'm not here because I had all the answers. I'm here because I saw what was broken and refused to look away." For 20 minutes, I laid it all bare. The will reading, the betrayal, the lies, and the choice to build something new. But more than that, I said, I'm here for Marcus, for Lucia, for every kid told they don't belong in science because of their zip code, their quiet voice, or who their parents aren't. I closed with a line Grandpa wrote me long. I go, "The brightest lights burn silently." When I stepped off stage, the applause didn't fade. That night, our foundation was flooded with donations. More importantly, the investigation was dropped. We were cleared. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Principal Harris, the same man who'd once sent me to detention for correcting a math teacher. "We'd like you to speak at this year's graduation," he said. "The students asked for you." The auditorium was packed. It's my old school, the same stage where my father once stood years ago. I looked out at the sea of caps and gowns. "You are not your last name," I told them. "You are not your parents' mistakes. You are not too late, too quiet, or too far behind." The applause roared like a storm. That night, Mom showed up at the center. No flowers, no apology. She stood in the doorway, stiff. "I hope you're proud," she said. "You've dragged our family's name through the mud." I met her eyes. Calm now. I pulled myself out of it. She left without another word. The unfolding future weeks passed, and the work continued. Then, one morning, I found a bouquet of wildflowers on my desk. No note, just a paperclip holding 2 documents. The first was from the State Education Board, approval to expand the Quiet Geniuses project to 5 more counties. The second was from the Oak Ridge Historical Society. They were naming the old library after Grandpa. The plaque would read, "In honor of George Alton for the quiet minds who dared to speak." For the first time in months, I let myself cry. The ceremony was simple, just the way it should be. Wooden chairs dotted the lawn behind the library, lavender blooming along the fences, the sky a soft, calming blue. I stood by the podium, clutching Grandpa's old lecture binder, now holding the letter that had changed everything. Marcus, one of our first students, fiddled with his tie as he approached, nervous but proud. He'd just won a scholarship to MIT and was about to share how the Quiet Geniuses project had reshaped his life. Behind us, a new sign gleamed, the George and Roselton Center for Young Innovators. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was real, built brick by brick, class by class, growing into a movement. Then Vanessa arrived late in a plain dress, looking thinner than I remembered. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment before she slipped into the back row. Silent when Marcus finished his speech, I took the stage. A few years ago, I sat in a lawyer's office and was told I deserved nothing. I began, think if I wanted a future, I had to earn it. So, I did, but not alone. I spoke of Grandpa, the students, the silence that once defined me, and how I found my voice in the echoes of those overlooked for too long. When I stepped down, the applause was warm, lingering like a summer breeze. Afterward, Vanessa approached. "You were right," she said, her eyes glistening, "about everything." I nodded. That was enough. She turned and walked away. That week, 2 letters arrived. The first, from the Department of Education, granted statewide funding for our program. The second was a short handwritten note from Mom. "I don't understand you, but I see what you've built. I hope it brings you peace." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a fight either. A month later, summer had settled in. I stood outside the center, watching kids spill in for a robotics camp, their laughter mixing with the rustle of notebooks. Across the street, I spotted my father alone in a wrinkled shirt, clutching a clipboard, collecting signatures for a petition no one cared about. He saw me, looked down, and kept walking. The contrast hit hard. I had students, community, purpose. He had shadows. That evening, I sat on the porch, Grandma's old quilt draped over my shoulders. A girl from the program handed me a small flower pot with a card, "For the one who made space for quiet voices." Tears welled up because healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it comes in the soft whispers of those who dare to grow. Conclusion: before we wrap up today's story, I want to thank you. Yes, you, watching from wherever you are. If Ava's journey touched your heart, if it reminded you of the strength in silence or the power of forging your own path, please support our channel. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this one. This is Hidden Family Revenge Stories, where the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next.